Welcome to the Infinite Surface Podcast. I'm Jesse Thompson, and this is Season 2 of Fat Stacks. Today we're going over Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Guptill. I'm really excited to go over this book because honestly, it was one of the reasons I started doing this series to begin with. The purpose of Fat Stacks isn't just to review books to give you my opinion on them, but it's really to let you know what I think is special about them, what makes them stand out from all the other books that cover a similar topic. Like a lot of the previous books I've covered, I think Rendering in Pen and Ink is misunderstood and underestimated, to be honest, and that's mostly due to its title, Rendering in Pen and Ink. It makes it sound like a technical manual on inking, and to some extent it is, but it goes far beyond a skill-based guide to pen and ink. What sets it apart is the depth at which it explores compositional concepts like controlling focus through value and using tonal reversals to create clarity. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. This book will make that perfectly clear. I first found this book when I was in the RISD library. That's the library of the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island. That school has such a wonderful art library, and I found this book just like I found so many others there, just by wandering through the stacks and picking up the ones that looked interesting to me. I was studying pen and ink at the time, so this was perfect. The volume that I found there was a hardcover, and it was called Drawing in Pen and Ink, not Rendering in Pen and Ink. And it was old. I think it was published around 1945 and dusty. And it looked exactly like the kind of book that would have secrets from the past or spells. It looked like a spell book from the Hogwarts library. The version that I'm reviewing today was republished in 1997, and honestly, it feels totally different. It's one that I bought years later from Amazon, and of course, it's not as nice as the older version. But when I got it in the mail, what really stood out to me is that it seems to be about 50% fewer pages. It's thinner than the book that I remember holding in the library. In the editor's note, it addresses this. It says, the text has been fairly well preserved in an attempt to remain faithful to the original. Nearly all of the original book has been retained in this new edition. In particular, it says, virtually all of the drawings, those by Mr. Guptill, as well as by other artists, have been included. For the most part, I agree. But as I flipped through my new copy, I was convinced that one key drawing was missing. I could picture it clearly in my mind from when I saw it in the RISD library all those years ago. And it stood out as essential, one of the reasons I was drawn to the book in the first place. But no matter how many times I flipped through the pages of this new volume, I could not find it. So years later, I happened to be back in Providence and I returned to the RISD library with the intention of finding that image that had been quietly edited out of the new version. In this one, a great page of simplified reversals that I feel really tie Guptill's concepts on composition and value together. I found it there, and I snapped a photo, printed it, and now I keep it tucked inside my copy of the book, right where it belongs. It's an image I share with my students in almost every drawing class that I teach. So if the editors or publishers happen to be listening, please just add one more page of drawings back in. So let's get inside the book. The first few chapters of this book do indeed read like a technical manual for pen and ink drawing, but the pages are illustrated with Guptill's clever drawings, making these pages on tools and materials fun to read. These pages are great, but something similar can be found in almost any pen and ink book, or even books on comics like The Marvel Way to Draw. After that, he quickly moves on to what is now a fairly standard set of exercises for ink drawing, creating patterns of line work that optically read as gray. Although this part can also be found in so many other books as well, I feel Guptill does a great job with it. It's just really thorough and creative. Here we can see some basic line work strategies such as drawn slowly with pressure, drawn slowly with varied pressure, drawn slowly with irregular lines, slowly with even pressure, drawn slowly with varied pressure. I love that he takes the time to go over the difference between slowly made and quickly made marks. This is so essential and important to train, no matter what medium you're working in. He even has a part that is called Drawn Quickly with Freedom, which, when I started to understand this well, it really helped me understand the difference between an artist like Charles Dana Gibson and an artist like Franklin Booth. Both are masters of composition, value, line work, and ink, but just essentially they make very different kinds of lines, and this gives their artwork a really different kind of feeling. He also has a section of values made of regular and irregular pattern values, which he calls special tones or decorative tones. This becomes especially important to understand later in the book, and we'll talk about that later when he discusses controlling focus within the frame. He then goes over gradating tones, which he illustrates really nicely in the chapter called Starting to Draw in Light and Shade. Here, I feel like he illustrates the effects so well throughout the chapter, starting with very basic forms like these, and moving on to more complicated renderings with gradated values. This page always really struck me. It really turned me on to the idea that simple objects with super simple shapes can make for beautiful drawings if the values are approached simply and sensibly and made with interesting line work. His next chapter, Drawing Groups of Objects, is one of my favorites. It's where the strength of this book really comes out, and where that special missing page becomes so important. This group of 3 images was somehow really important to me, even though it seems so obvious the way that Guptill draws it, and when you look at it, it just lays out so clearly the freedom to use values to your advantage in a composition, rather than either copying or relying on what we see or being overly logical about it. Here, Guptill doesn't seem to care whether the wall is dark or light in color in reality. He doesn't need to be faithful to that. He's simply designing the composition in 3 values and using either white and gray, black and gray, or gray and black. He gets into this even more in the next chapter, The Basic Principles of Composition. Here, let's take a close look at our special missing page and see what he's really talking about. This is a page of compositional reversals, and to be honest, it looks a lot like what we see in Wally Wood's 22 panels that always work. Just basic composition designs that are so powerful because they're predicated on value reversals. Here in the missing page, we see examples of his reversals using simple black, gray, and white compositions.
One of the biggest advantages to working in pen and ink is that you have to draw only in black and white. There is no gray. There's only optical grays when you break up the black and white with the white of the paper like this. Guptill talks about this here in the bottom corner of the page, where he says, many optical illusions can be created with values. These diagrams demonstrate what can be done with black and white alone. So here we see his very simple but super effective value reversal strategies. Here he lays it out in simple black and white. White, gray, black, white. White, gray, black, white. White, gray, white, black. White, gray, white, black. White, gray, black, white, black. White, gray, black, white, black. White, gray, white, black, white. White, gray, white, black, white. These are very cinematic, very good at creating silhouettes, and very good at creating clarity in your composition.
Later in the chapter, he gets into more complicated examples of how to use these strategies, like here.
Here we see some great examples of Guptill managing his values with his details for compositional effect. So here you'll notice he says focused at left, but we'll also notice that the detail has been reduced in order to create a greater white space, and the darks are darker than we find over here on the other side, where the darks are grayer and there's more detail filling in the white space, making it grayer. This creates higher contrast on the left where he wants to focus, and less contrast on the right where he wants you to come second or third. Here below, you see he says to focus at the center, and you'll notice that he's done a different thing. If you compare from the top to the bottom, you'll notice that the black around the door is darker here and lighter there. You'll notice that some of the details inside the door are missing, so that it's a whiter space. And any of the details here in the face of the building are gone, so that it's white, black, white, black, white, all reversals. On either end of the house, you'll notice that the darks got a little bit grayer and that the lights got a little bit grayer. Here, this is pretty much white, and here, this is pretty much gray. This brings the focus to the center of the building instead of to the left or the right. In the last example, Guptill wants to focus at the right. So again, he's just changed his level of detail and changed his contrast in that area. So here, you'll notice that the details in the building are missing again, whereas here we see them included in order to create a gray. Here in the middle, the details in the door have shown up again, as have these vertical lines to give the texture of the front face of the building. We'll notice that the trees here got darker, creating a white, gray, black, white, black. And then here, white, gray, white, gray, white, gray. So the contrast is greater here at the right, and less at the center and at the left, creating focus at the right. This is another beautiful example where Guptill has taken the same composition, but changed the value structure in each so that the narrative of each image is more or less the same, but the narrative sequence at which you see it is different. Here you'll notice that the contrast is at the arch, meaning that the focus is below. And here you'll notice that the greater contrast is above, meaning that the focus is above. So by creating a white-gray-white relationship, this becomes a secondary part of the composition. Whereas here, creating a white-gray-white value relationship makes this a secondary part of the composition, and this the primary.
And in these examples where he discusses the difference between drawings that emphasize shape and shadow or drawings that emphasize texture. Later, in chapter 16, he revisits this topic specifically applied to architecture. It's followed up with countless examples of how artists solve typical problems in a composition, even if it doesn't involve architecture, and includes this illustration by Robert Lockwood, which is absolutely one of my favorites. In the next chapter, Drawing from Photographs, he combines all the previous concepts into a conversation about how to be creative with reference. Obviously, when he says reference, he means photographic reference, but for me, I apply the same principles and thinking even when I'm drawing from observation or imagination. In this chapter, he discusses creative ways to think about managing value with detail and texture, and gives us two really different solutions, both great. This reminds me a lot of Sean Martinborough's examples from his book How to Draw Noir Comics, where he contrasts line drawings with value drawings, not valuing one over the other, but understanding their different powers and effects. Guptill also discusses different options for framing the composition, and again, I feel like this is best applicable as an overall lesson about the power of choosing as an artist, not just copying what is in front of you, but being actively creative about how you make the image you are making. If you want to study up more on the topic of value and line work as it relates to composition and storytelling, I suggest you read Sean Martinborough's book, How to Draw Noir Comics, which I reviewed in Season 1. And you can also look at Marcos Mathieu Maestra's, sorry for the pronunciation, I think that's not right, but he wrote Framed Ink and Framed Ink 2, two great books which I'll go over in a later episode of Season 2. Later in the book, Guptill does discuss some specific subject matters, such as drawing trees, which is such a common struggle for all artists, and architectural details, which is the same, just a really difficult thing to figure out how to manage and fit into a composition. Guptill is great at this, and I think this is a really good book to illuminate how to problem solve some of these issues. The rest of the book is filled with great illustrations from Guptill and other artists, like Reginald Birch, Joseph Clement Cole, Franklin Booth, Rockwell Kent, F.L. Griggs, John R. Neal, John R. Flanagan, Charles Dana Gibson, James Montgomery Flagg, Gordon Grant, and so many others. Some other artists I'd like to suggest you check out on this kind of topic, their relationship between composition, line work, value structure, and storytelling, are Gustave Doré, Maurice Sendak, Frank Frazetta, Anders Zorn, Will Eisner, Aubrey Beardsley, Nicholas Delort, Bernie Wrightson. There's so many more. Endless amounts of artists that are working with this kind of thinking and are great examples. But this is a good start. This book is filled with so many great images and examples. I could go on forever about each one and do a critique on each individual image and how it works. But I'll leave it here, and I'll encourage you to pick up your own copy and give it a good read and a good study, because it's really one of the best books on the topic, and it really does give a great insight into drawing in any material. Guptill has a few other books, including one called Rendering in Pencil, or the older version is called Sketching and Rendering in Pencil, which in many ways is very similar to his book on pen and ink, but just worked out in a different medium. So give that a try too. Thanks for watching this episode of Fat Stacks, where we went over Arthur Guptill's Rendering in Pen and Ink. I hope that this book is as useful for you as it was and is for me. And I hope the video was useful for you too. And if you liked it, then please like it and subscribe. It'll help you get updates about upcoming episodes with super useful books about art and design. In the meantime, keep reading, keep studying, and definitely keep drawing. Thanks from Infinite Surface.